Okay, I think we should start getting our seats and preparing. Sorry, rough.
Can you turn the chat off?
Okay, so I think we're ready here. No, we're not. Okay, quiet please. Now we're ready. Good morning again, welcome back. And if you happen to miss the morning meditation session, welcome again to Padmavajra. We're in a slightly different position here to what you saw last night, so you can see behind me more of our Loka's work in the shrine room, the paintings that this afternoon he's going to be talking all about in interview with Padmavajra. So a little taste there of the shrine room, particularly if you've never been before. Do come back this afternoon to see our Loka and the interview with him, talking all about the images and icons that we've got in the shrine room here. So before I introduce Padmavajra to give us the talk, there are two important practical announcements. The first one's for everybody. So at the end of Padmavajra's talk, we will have a short break before we go into discussion groups. But it's really important that you don't log out after the talk. So stay logged in to this Zoom session, because all the groups have been pre-assigned. If you log out, then you're out of the system basically. So do stay logged in so that you can just get put easily and smoothly into your discussion group after the talk and after the break. So do not go anywhere, just stay here all morning. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is for the group leaders. So I mentioned this last night, but group leaders, at the end of your session today, if you could leave some time to collect questions from the guys in your group, and then email those questions to the guest master's email address, so info@padmaloka.org.uk. You'll all have that email address already. So if you could send those questions into that email address, and then I'll be able to look through them and collate them, and I'll be putting those questions directly to Padmavajra tomorrow morning at 12 o'clock. So for all of you, it's your opportunity to directly ask Padmavajra a question about what he's going to talk about this morning for us. So do think of some questions and look forward to seeing what you send in. Okay, so it's always a pleasure to introduce Padmavajra. He's my private preceptor. He ordained me, gave me my name, but he's also a great friend as well. So it's always a pleasure to be able to introduce him, particularly to so many people this morning. So I think we had 187 people logging in, but obviously we've got some people in groups in different places. As I said last night, we're expecting over 200. So introducing Padmavajra this morning to a good-sized audience. Some of you might never have met Padmavajra, so just to give you a bit of a brief biography of him. I will be brief, don't worry. So Padmavajra found the Dharma, or found the movement, Triratna movement, although it wasn't called that then, back at the age of 17. And he often tells the story that the first thing he did was a metta bhavana and a sevenfold puja, and he loved it, and he knew that he wanted to be an order member, I believe. And at the age of 19, he was an order member. So he was ordained by Bhante Sangharachita at the age of 19. I think the first thing he did as an order member pretty much was get involved with the building project in London, building Sakavati, the London Buddhist Centre, as a young order member. And then he went off to India to team up with Lokamitra there and to start establishing the Triratna community as it is now in India. He then moved back. Tell me if I get any of this wrong. He came back to the UK and spent time in Croydon, where he was the Mitra convener and worked in the vegetarian restaurant, Hockney's, team-based right livelihood restaurant. And I think he would work full shifts and then go to the centre and give talks and
Yeah,
lead
sort
classes.
of, yeah.
So quite an intense lifestyle for Padmavajra in that period. And then he went back to India for a second spell. And then I think it was 89 or 90. 90. Padmavajra came here to Padmaloka, so he was invited to join the new ordination team that has been here and established here ever since. So Padmavajra has been at Padmaloka now over 30 years and doing that work. So being very involved in the Going for Refuge retreats for many of us for ordination. He's become, since his arrival here, a private preceptor, public preceptor. So a lot of responsibility for ordinations. I also mentioned the Mitra conveners last night. Padmavajra's overall Mitra convener for men in Europe and the UK.
Yeah.
Europe and the UK now. And he's the president of Sheffield. So I don't know if I've missed anything out there.
Well, the Buddhist centre, not the city.
The Buddhist centre, not the city. Yeah. Okay, so Padmavajra, obviously somebody who has taken on a lot of responsibility in the order. But I think one of the things I just want to say is that I think one of his major contributions, his creative outlets and contributions to the life of the order and the movement, has been through his talks. So all the Dharma talks that he's given over the years, there must have been hundreds, if not thousands, of talks over the years. And if you go on Free Buddhist Audio, I've done this, there are just pages and pages of talks by Padmavajra. Not just standalone single talks, but series of talks on all kinds of things, from the Pali Canon to the old Zen masters and the crazy wisdom of the Mahasiddhas. So all these talks pouring out of Padmavajra over the years and his creative activity. And it's been interesting for me moving here, so I've been here 4 years now, and just watching the way Padmavajra gives talks, but also prepares them. And there's obviously a lot of study and reflection that goes into his talks, but it's almost like Padmavajra seems to be able to enter into a kind of atmosphere, or enters into a particular realm or world when he's preparing a talk. It seems to involve a lot of walks on his own in the nature reserve, and just pondering things and really trying to get a sense of what he's due to talk about and enter this kind of atmosphere or realm. And I think that's what he really shares with us when he gives a talk. So yes, there's clarity, yes, there's the exposition of dharmic concepts and different formulations that we have from the tradition, but there's also a real depth, a real beauty, a real poetry to the talks that Padmavajra gives. Lots of images. It's as if he paints with words and has the power to fascinate. And we've got this aphorism in the movement that the Dharma's caught, not taught. And I think Padmavajra is somebody that you really can catch the Dharma from in the way that he gives those talks, but just in the way he is. I think one can catch the Dharma from Padmavajra by hearing him speak, hearing him communicate the Dharma, but also by being on retreat with him, studying with him, living with him, even just having a walk with him, relaxing with him, having a laugh with him, because Padmavajra is somebody that really lives the Dharma. It's in his bones, as it were, and you can really catch that from him. So I'm delighted to introduce you this morning, Padmavajra. As I said, a great communicator, a great friend to me, a great friend to the community here, a great friend to many of you. And I'm looking forward to entering into the atmosphere of the Bardo Todol with you this morning. So looking forward to hearing what you've got to say and catching the Dharma from you. So a round of applause just to welcome Padmavajra.
Thank you very much, Padmasambhava. Brothers in the Dharma, this is interesting because the community is over there and you're there on the screen, those of you who aren't at Padmaloka, so it's going to be quite interesting. And there's the camera there, so my eyes are going to be, I'm going to be moving around quite a bit. I did get very excited last night and again this morning, seeing you all coming in, many old friends and some people I've never met before. So if I think we all get a bit excited seeing you. So that's why we say things and so on. As you know, we usually have these events here at Padmavajra, and we can't do that, and it's very painful for us that we can't do what we do best in many ways, and that's host people here at Padmavajra for retreats and weekends. So we are very excited that you're joining us through this medium. So I'm really pleased to be with you. I'm very pleased to be with the community in this context. We all are. We're all here communicating. It's not, I'm doing the talk, but it's all coming from Padmavajra, and I think it's very important to understand that. And thanks very much, Padmavajra, for such a beautiful introduction. I'm going to begin with a verse that's been on my mind, actually. I suppose, as Padmavajra said, getting into the atmosphere of this talk. It's not actually from the Bardo to Dol, it's from the Dhammapada. It's the Buddha's words. You are now like a withered leaf. Death's men have approached you. You stand at the door of departure, and you do not even have provisions for the road. Make a lamp for yourself. Strive quickly and become one who is spiritually mature, with stains removed and free from blemish. You will reach the celestial plane of the spiritually developed. You are now of advanced age. You have gone forth into the presence of death. There is no resting place for you in between, and you do not even have provisions for the road. Make a lamp for yourself. Strive quickly and become one who is spiritually mature. With stains removed and free from blemish, you will not undergo repeated birth and old age anymore. Very haunting words there from the Buddha in the Dhammapada. And they've been on my mind. Another thing that's been on my mind, it's very hard to know why these things happen, but another thing that's been on my mind has been a memory of India. When I first went there, as Padmavajra said, that was in 1978. He said team up with Lokamitra, not exactly, it was more sort of holding on to Lokamitra's robes. He was an Anagarika then, as he set up our Sangha. I was just sort of struggling along, really. And early on that visit, we went on pilgrimage to Shravasti, where the Buddha spent so many rainy seasons. And then we took the train from Lucknow to Ahmedabad, which is a very long journey. So we were going from sort of northeastern India right across the subcontinent to Ahmedabad in the west. And I remember we stopped at a station, one of those long stops on a train journey like that. It was either Jhansi or Bina, I think, I can't quite remember which, somewhere in Madhya Pradesh in central India. And I remember looking out of the window, it was the middle of the day, and lying on the platform was a man under a white sheet, a young man actually, with some policemen standing by him. I couldn't work out whether he was just very sick or whether he was dead. He looked completely helpless and he was just lying there, and that image has never left my mind. And in many ways it was sort of reflective of how I was finding my time in India. It was a huge shock for me to move to India. I thought it would be easy and I'd be inspired all the time, but it was a tremendous shock, a tremendous cultural shock. I was in my early 20s, I was just ordained, and I was completely at sea. I was completely lost. I was, in a sense, in a bardo, an in-between, in the sense of all the Padmavajra mentioned last night, Trungpa Rinpoche's description of bardo as groundlessness. And my ground had gone. My ground had gone. And I think not least because illness and death and disease, and if you like, irrationality, as far as I was concerned, was on the streets and in the railway stations. And it completely disturbed me. It completely I sort of started to break down in some ways, and also having health problems of various kinds, such as I'd never experienced before in Britain. And of course, in those days, 1970s, there was no iPhone or anything of that nature. When you travelled, you really travelled. You left behind security completely, especially if you went into another culture, not as a tourist, but actually fully immersed in that culture. I remember as well, not long after we'd got there, when we'd started to establish ourselves, one of our mitras, suddenly died. Mr. Wagmaray suddenly died. One of those sudden deaths that seems to happen in India. A family man, and suddenly he was there one day, and the next day he'd gone. And I remember, the funerals happened very quickly in India. And I remember it was the first time I'd definitely seen a dead body. It was a classic Indian cremation at the Burning Ghat by the river, and this dead body in a white sheet lying on a funeral pile made of wood and dung. And we saw, Lokamitra and me saw this body melting into the flames, and this very, very somber atmosphere. Of course, they were grieving family members, but there was this tremendous gravity among his men friends, and especially Sangha friends, giving talks about him, and we had the Buddhist puja and so on, and it was quite an extraordinary thing to experience. Very powerful, I suppose, but also strangely liberating, because it was all open. Nothing was hidden away. You could see everything. But nonetheless, these sort of signs in India of mortality, of threat in a way, well, I experienced them at the time as threat because I was spiritually immature. As the text says, the Buddha's word says, I did not feel I had the provisions for the road of life, the road of facing up to birth and death. I felt very mature. Yes, I've been a Buddhist for a few years, and of course I had all the meditational tools that I could have had, and all the dharmic perspectives I could have had. But I really felt really at sea. I mean, it did change. Eventually, it did change, and I did manage to gather the resources. There was the emergence of a light unto myself. Emerging, as the Buddha says. It could also be translated not just as a light unto oneself, but as be an island unto oneself. So I've been reflecting on these verses, and that experience in looking at what we can learn from the Bardo Todol, the liberation through hearing in the Bardo. Because in a way, this text is saying the same thing. If you are going to when you enter the moment of death, the bardo of the moment of death, you need lots of provisions. You need to have gathered all the provisions necessary for this journey, and it very definitely is a journey. You need to fully enter into the reality undistractedly. And to do that, you need all those internal provisions to actually really contemplate that reality. I'll say a little bit about the Bardo Todol, the liberation through hearing in the Inbetween state, which has become popularly known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because the first English translation of it by Evans Wentz and Kazidawa Sumdup was sort of copying the Egyptian Book of the Dead that had been published many years earlier. It's interesting, historically, it's quite an obscure Tibetan text, and it doesn't actually it isn't the death traditions of all of Tibetan Buddhist schools. It's actually of one particular school, and even initially probably, only perhaps a minor part of that school. It's not the definitive way of describing the death process and death rituals of the entire Buddhist tradition. Throughout the Buddhist world, there are different ways of approaching this important time, and it's very important to remember that and not be dogmatic about a text like this. And Westerners approaching this material are going to be learning from it more in principle than all the precise details of what happens, particularly to do with the mythology and symbolism associated with this particular text. But nonetheless, it's of great value and importance. It's, as Padmavajra said yesterday, it's a dharma, a treasure text, a text which was hidden away by the great 8th century guru Padmasambhava for future generations to practice. It was found by an emanation of one of his disciples. I won't go into the whole sort of tradition of dharma, which is fascinating. It's a very inspired, creative tradition found in the 14th century by Rigzin Karma Lingpa in Gampo, the Gampo Mountains in Tibet. I think that's part of southern Tibet, I think. Karma Lingpa found it when he was just 14 years old. 14 years old. Now, whatever one makes of this text, it is a work of genius. There's absolutely no doubt about that, the way it brings together so many strands of Buddhist tradition. But I won't go into all that. That would take us too far afield. You'd need a whole lecture series, I think, to really explore this. My talk is going to be more impressionistic, I think. First of all, this word bardo. Let's look at this word bardo. It means between two. Between two. Between one state, between the ending of one state and the beginning of another state. And it translates the Sanskrit term antarabhava. Antarabhava, the in-between existence. This is a very ancient Indian concept. It's very important to understand this. The Bardo Tadol is, yes, a Tibetan text, but it's founded on Indian tradition. And in this Indian tradition, going back and back and back and back, in the very early days of the establishment of the Dharma in India, there was this notion, according to some of the earliest schools of Buddhism, that when you die, you then enter an in-between before you're reborn. I'm not going to go into all sort of arguments about whether or not there's rebirth and what happens. I'm just going to accept the tradition as it's come down to us. You enter an in-between. You have you're in a kind of what's called a mind-made body, and you undergo all kinds of visions, and eventually you are reborn after going on this particular journey. And this was taken up and developed, this particular tradition, particularly in Tantric Buddhism, Indian Tantric Buddhism, but especially in the Tibetan Nyingma school. You have the identification of no less than 6 bardos, 6 in-betweens. So there's first of all the bardo of life. This is this life itself, because it's between birth and death. This is a space. The previous life, the in-between, has ended. Death has not arisen. This is an opening. It's a very precious human existence, full of potential. So it's a place that we can work in order to develop and change. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. Then there's identified the bardo of dream. The bardo of dream and sleep is, of course, between 2 waking states. Dream is regarded as a space in which you can make very great spiritual progress, because in that state everything is sort of open and flexible. Very, very interesting. You can have very significant dreams and spiritual experiences within the dream state, which do actually transform you. Then there's the bardo of profound meditation, dhyana, samadhi, because that's between two thoughts. Real meditation is a space in which there's no discursive activity. Everything is wide open. The ground has gone. I might say something a bit about that later. Then there's the bardo of the moment of death. You've died and something opens up. I'll say a bit more about what opens up before you move on into the other bardos. There's then, after the bardo of the moment of death, the bardo of reality itself. After you've died, you actually see things as they really are, but you can't recognize that. There's the bardo of taking rebirth. These are the 6 bardos. They're all spaces. I think this is the really crucial thing. They have their different qualities. Obviously, the bardo of the moment of death is a time of groundlessness. The other bardos have, in a sense, in some ways, like the bardo of life, has more stability. So they have their different qualities, but they're all being identified as opportunities, spaces in which you can make real change. Even spaces in which there are choices. You can choose either liberation or greater and greater imprisonment in your habitual activity, in your sort of the consequences of your karma. So I want to particularly, let's look particularly a little bit at the bardo of the moment of death. Well, let's just dwell on that, not in detail, but that is in a way the typical moment, if you like, of bardo, this sense of groundlessness, of everything in this case being taken away. The elements begin to dissolve. This is described in the Bardo Todol. There's a wonderful poem by Bhante called "The 6 Elements Speak," because we're made up of earth, water, fire, air, space, and consciousness. And there's a meditation, very important central meditation in our tradition that Bhante's given us, where we let go of our attachment to these elements that make up our personality in order to open up to reality. And the last verse of that poem, in a way, describes the process of dissolution at the time of death. Earth dissolves into water. Water dissolves into fire. Fire dissolves into air. Air dissolves into space. Space dissolves into consciousness. Consciousness dissolves into whom? It's the last verse of that poem, just leaving you with this profound mystery, this complete letting go. This describes the process of death. And at that moment, reality opens up to you. Visions and images and symbols open up to you. You go on a visionary journey. And the Bardo Todol is called the liberation through hearing, because it describes the way in which the Lama or a Dharma brother, a good Dharma friend, is talking to you. Apparently, you have enormous sensitivity when you die. You actually haven't gone. You're very, very sensitive. You pick up on everything that's going on around you. And in the Tibetan tradition they say, well, you can transmit something. So the Lama is a guide, a friend, a protector. I think this is hugely significant. A real friend to you, guiding you on the most perilous journey of all, the moment of death and beyond that, so that you don't get lost. It's interesting, this whole business of sensitivity. When we're dying, I had a very strange experience of this when my mother was in her last days. She was very, very old, in her care home. She was very, very deaf, and she wasn't eating. She'd sort of given up, really. in her 90s. And I'd gone to see her with my sister in this care home, and she was lying curled up like a tiny bird, just skin and bones. And my sister and I were just with her. Somebody came in, a social worker came in to help us, because my mother's money had run out to pay for the care home, so we were having to work out how to finance her. And this social worker she happened to be there and she wanted to help. And my mother started to shake. She started to shake uncontrollably. And I went to the nurse, and the nurse said, she knows that you're there. She knows she's being talked about, and she knows it's something important. My mother's mind had kind of gone long before, and she couldn't hear. I mean, the social worker understood and left, and I just went and put my hand on my mother and spoke to her, and she immediately calmed down. But it communicated to me this sensitivity. It cut through, I think, quite a lot of materialistic notions when you experience something like this, that the consciousness at that time is extraordinarily sensitive, and it can be affected when you communicate. And it's so important to be so positive at the time of death for the person dying. One of the things that the bardo describes is the denial. Very often people are in denial that they are actually dead. There's sort of descriptions of how the dead person is realizing that people are relating to them as if they're not there. And they're walking around the house saying, no, I'm here. Why aren't you acknowledging me? What are you doing performing this ritual? And in any case, you're doing it wrong because, you've got this apparently you've got this sort of super vision when you're in the after-death state, and you can see all the wrong motives, all the dodgy stuff going on, and you're in denial. So this is why you need a friend. You need at least one person who's talking to you, who's communicating to you about your journey. So often when somebody dies, we're obviously, people are grieving at the loss of the person who's going, but really, at that time, we must be incredibly altruistic and think of that person. Think of their journey. It's sometimes said, and this can sound a bit harsh, but the Tibetan tradition says, well, no, the grieving people should be kept away because it's confusing to that consciousness on their journey. Maybe, I don't know how we relate to that, but this is the problem, if you like, with worldly friends. They're very attached and they have all their concerns, and attachment in the end is self-centered. So we need a friend, we need a teacher, we need a spiritual friend who will look after our needs. And this is one of the things I think is never really gone into when you have discussions about the Bardo Todol. It's actually a book of friendship. I think it's a book about friendship, the deepest possible friendship of a guide who is just concerned with your welfare as you go on what they call the narrow, dangerous, perilous journey of the in-between of the Bardo. And of course, if we're going to talk like that about that time, that brings up, if we're going to learn from the Bardo Todol, we need friends now. And, when we come to those crisis situations in our life, we can often look around and think, well, I haven't really got any friends. I thought I had friends, but they're actually only interested in themselves in the end. And now when I really need something, I don't have any friends. And I don't have any spiritual friends, people who I really share the Dharma life with. So it's very important that we cultivate friends. And of course, how do we cultivate friends? We have to be a friend. So if we're going to learn anything from the Bardo Todol, we have to learn how to be a friend. It's the only way that friendships can arise, is actually giving love and kindness and generosity to our friends, and really working on ourselves, developing ourselves so that we've got some real qualities so we can be the best possible friend. It's said in the texts, that even in the Pali Canon, that a true friend is a refuge to the other friend. And I remember when we studied this with Bhante, he said, well, that means you need to have something transcendental that cannot be destroyed to be a real friend to others. So we need to learn this. We need to learn this if we're to be a real friend to one another in this life. It's no use waiting until these crisis situations. We need to work on that now. And it's interesting, very early on, at the moment of death, the guide, the person speaking to the deceased person, says, "O son of noble family, the time has come for you to seek a path." I find that an extraordinarily important phrase. You're being overwhelmed with this sense of groundlessness, of panic, of anxiety and fear, of all this dissolution. And there's a voice saying, "O son of noble family, the time has come for you to seek a path." I think just in that phrase, there's so much teaching. You know, even in this life now, okay, it might not be death, maybe it's illness or loss or whatever it might be. We need to hear that voice. All right, everything's falling apart. It feels like that. Don't be overwhelmed. O son of noble family, the time has come for you to seek a path. There is a path. There's always a path through this. There's never not a path. And of course, the more you've practiced the Dharma, the path of the Dharma, the more you can find a path in the arising of new phenomena, the arising of new difficult experiences. So this brings us, of course, to the whole business of the first bardo, the bardo of life, the birthplace bardo, the bardo of this life, which Padmavajra mentioned last night. "O now, when the bardo of life upon me is dawning, abandoning idleness, there being no idleness in a devotee's life, entering into the reality undistractedly, listening, reflecting and meditating." Listening, reflecting and meditating. That sums up the whole path. It's the path of gathering wisdom. It's the practice of wisdom, and you do that through learning. First of all, listening, really hearing and learning what the Buddha and what the great teachers have said. You really take it in. You really take in what the teaching is saying. It doesn't have to be vast amounts, but you really know your basic Dharma. You can't find a path if you don't know a basic Dharma, that you really have that in your mind. And of course, you reflect upon it. You really turn it over in your mind. You get intent upon it. You let it begin to transform your life. You turn it, that's what meditating on it really is. You turn it into a living experience. That's what life is for, as far as Buddhist tradition is concerned. That's how you enter into the reality undistractedly, through listening, reflecting and meditating, carrying on to the path, knowledge of the true nature of appearances and of mind. You could boil this down. The true nature of appearances and of mind is knowing, learning through listening, reflecting and meditating, that there is nothing fixed and permanent and stable in the whole of life. Everything is impermanent. Everything is insubstantial. Everything is praticca samuppada. The more you can learn that through Buddhist practice, the more you can change. The more you can transform. The more you can move along the path of spiritual development. Really learning this essential truth. Then the next line is, may the Trikaya be realized. The Trikaya are the three Buddha bodies. The Dharmakaya, the body of reality. The Sambhogakaya, the blissful body. And the Nirmanakaya, the manifest body. But what they mean by that is you transform your body, speech and mind into the three bodies of the Buddha, into the enlightened body, speech and mind of the Buddha. That's what life is for, as far as Buddhist tradition is concerned. The Buddha is your, if you like, your ideal. That's what you're aiming for. You transform your life in the light of that. May the Trikaya be realized once that the human form has been attained. May there be no time or opportunity in which to idle it away. That's what we're doing with this life. That's the great learning from the Bardo Tadal. It's living this life. This is what life is for. It's interesting, this last line, once that the human form has been attained, may there be no time or opportunity in which to idle it away. In this tradition, as it is throughout the entire Buddhist tradition, human life is regarded as extraordinarily precious. This life form is so extraordinarily precious and valuable. There can be a habit, I think, in the modern world to give the human life form a bit of a hard time. People talking about the terrible effects we have on the environment and this, that and the other. And you almost have kind of modern versions of what sound like almost Christian original sin. We're just bad news. But that's a terrible thing to do, I think. Buddhist tradition says, no, the human form is extraordinarily precious. We have this remarkable consciousness. We actually have the potentiality to realize all of the higher states of consciousness known throughout the cosmos and to transcend them entirely through realizing Buddhahood. The human form is to be celebrated, not in the sort of celebrity fashion that we see, but in terms of actually we have a human dignity, and if we did much more of that, we'd have a much more positive effect on our world, I feel. So, what happens at the time of death? You actually have a much more direct experience of that potential. That's why we really need to prepare in this life, because at the time of death, what opens up is reality itself, is pure consciousness itself. Let me just find the reading of that. O son of noble family, the time has come for you to seek a path. As soon as your breathing ceases, the luminosity known as the inner radiance of the first bardo, which your guru has shown you, will arise. Immediately you cease breathing, everything will become empty and utterly naked like space. At the same time, a naked awareness will arise, not separate from yourself, but radiant, empty, and without horizon or center. At that moment, you should personally recognize this intrinsic nature and rest in the state of that experience. I too will introduce it to you at that time. O Venerable One, I beg you not to be distracted from the cultivation of the bodhicitta, the altruistic intention. O son of noble family, that which is called death has now arrived. Therefore you should adopt an altruistic motivation and concentrate your thinking as follows. I have arrived at the time of death. I will single-mindedly cultivate an altruistic intention. I will meditate on the generation of loving kindness, compassion, and altruistic intention to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings who are limitless as space. I must attain perfect Buddhahood. And it goes on in this way as, really preparing you to see and open up to and recognize the reality of this clear awareness. A bit later, there's another sort of shining, beautiful language O son of noble family, listen. Pure inner radiance, reality itself, is now arising before you. Recognize it. O son of noble family, this radiant essence that is now your conscious awareness is a brilliant emptiness. It is beyond substance, beyond characteristics, and beyond colour, completely empty of inherent existence in any respect whatsoever. This is the female Buddha Samantabhadri, the essential nature of reality. The essence of your own conscious awareness is emptiness. Your very own conscious awareness is unimpededly radiant, brilliant, and vibrant. This conscious awareness is the male Buddha Samantabhadra. The utterly indivisible presence of these two, the essence of your own awareness, which is empty, without inherent existence, with respects to any substance whatsoever, and your own conscious awareness, which is vibrant and radiantly present, is the Dharmakaya. This intrinsic awareness, manifest in a great mass of light, in which radiance and emptiness are indivisible, is the Buddha of infinite light, beyond birth and death. Just to recognize this is enough. If you recognize this brilliant essence of your own conscious awareness to be the Buddha, then to gaze into intrinsic awareness is to abide in the enlightened intention of all the Buddhas. Extraordinary, incredible language, incredible vision. So it's saying that at the time of death, because there is this complete breakdown of one's being, because there is this bardo, this groundlessness, this opening, reality dawns as this pure, brilliant, radiant awareness, which is you and which transcends you at the same time, which is empty and radiant and brilliant. It's you're immediately, if you like, being thrust into the profoundest meditation of all at the time of death. This is why I think Bhante says in one of his aphorisms, death is a state of enforced meditation. Death is a state of enforced meditation. And this is why we need to practice meditation. If we're really going to prepare, well, not just for actual death, but for any groundless experience, or whatever that might be. We need to be absorbed in the profoundest meditation. By meditation, we really mean samadhi and dhyana, where there is no thought. We're not just meditating to sort of make ourselves feel a bit better for life, just sort of a bit of therapy, if you like. The intent of real Buddhist meditation is to enter into this kind of reality, is to go entirely beyond the senses and to give up all attachment to the senses. This isn't often talked about in contemporary discussions of meditation, but the tradition says, the ancient tradition says, that meditation comes out of withdrawal, is why you go on retreat when you meditate. You leave behind the usual things that you're distracted by. And that's the first withdrawal, the kaya viveka, taking yourself away. And then there's what's called the chitta viveka, where you remove your mind from sense experience and open up to these vaster states of consciousness, which we call dhyana, and then even beyond that. This is the kind of meditation that we need to be schooling ourselves in through our practice. And of course we need to live a life that is in accordance with that. I've been, Bhante in a few places talks about the importance of going forth from manas, which is the dualistic mind, the mind we use most of the time, which we do have to use, or vijnana, the dividing dualistic consciousness. He talks about going forth from manas or vijnana to jnana, which is non-dual awareness. Non-dual awareness, which can be terribly easy to misunderstand. It's usually when people discuss non-dual awareness, they do it with the manas and the vijnana, and they end up very, very confused, because that non-dual awareness is actually vast and open and completely selfless, but it is available to us. I think one of the things we have to realise with a text like the Bardo Todol, it's got an entirely different vision of what a human consciousness is. We are imprisoned by our materialistic, dualistic way of looking at things, and that affects the whole way we look at Buddhist practice. But Buddhist tradition, throughout the Buddhist tradition, it's always understood that the human being is a microcosm of the macrocosm. And this was something known in the West until it was pretty much destroyed by modern thinking from the Renaissance and the Reformation onwards. But in these traditions, which is similar to the Buddhist tradition, there's the universe is a universe of value, a universe not just of material form, but it's bound up with value in the sense of higher and higher, more refined, more pure, better and better states of consciousness. That's what hierarchy, spiritual hierarchy, really means. And in Buddhist tradition, this is the different God realms. But it's said that consciousness has the potential to experience all of that. When you look at the Abhidharma analyses of what the human consciousness is, it includes all the meditative states, all the heavenly states, but it also indicates what's beyond all of that, the Lokuttara, which is enlightenment. And in this Bardo Todol tradition, they say no, that intrinsic awareness, as they call it, that pure, clear light of reality is always there as a possibility to realise. And whenever there's a moment of groundlessness, it opens up. It opens up. But if you don't train in that, if you don't sort of change, in a sense, your mind and sort of get out of the vijnana mind or the manas mind and move towards jnana, which opens up to the hierarchy of consciousness, it's going to be very difficult for you to really open up to possibilities when the groundless opens up. You notice as well in this how much emphasis the guide is giving to developing the altruistic intention. This is hugely significant. It's hugely, you're being asked, develop your bodhicitta, develop loving kindness. You're finding a path, and it's the path of gaining enlightenment for all beings. I find this significant because, I don't know about you, but when I hit new experiences, new illnesses, new pains, new lockdown moments, when we don't know what's happening, the tendency I find is to contract. My consciousness does that. It's to protect myself. Even after years and years of Buddhist practice, that's what I do. There's fear, I pull back. This is saying push back. Push back, be expansive. Be expansive, embrace others with loving kindness. Move out from yourself. And of course, loving kindness is, in the end, non-dual. Real loving kindness, real metta, is seeing through self and other. I think this is one of the big messages that comes during this period of lockdown and insecurity. One of the big messages for me is to really practice loving kindness and to really push against that tendency to contract with fear and panic. And I must say, I don't want to sing our praises too much at Padmavajra, but I am going to rejoice in us. a little bit, and without any complacency, we've had a remarkably harmonious period since this lockdown period. There's a lot of warmth, and I would say a lot of love among the 14 men here. We do have wonderful conditions for that, but I think that's a very healthy sign as far as I'm concerned, that we're responding well to what is happening. Now, this moment of reality, the clear light of reality opening up, if we really develop, we recognise this pure, extraordinary awareness, this powerful awareness, which is absolutely overwhelming. It's not your ordinary mind here, even though it said it is your conscious awareness, but we're so alienated from it, it's just overwhelming. Humankind cannot bear very much reality, as I think T.S. Eliot once said. So we fall back, we swoon, it's too much. It's too much to bear, even with the guide guiding us, and maybe even because of the ballast that we've sort of got with us through our spiritual training and spiritual practice. And what then opens up, what we move into, is the next bardo. The bardo of dharmata, the bardo of reality. And here there are visions. It's as if that awareness, that showing of reality tries again through offering significant vision of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. When we can't relate to that, it's wrathful, it's semi-wrathful Buddhas. When that doesn't work, it's wrathful Buddhas, and then there's a complete explosion of different forms. And of course, this all is derived from the mythology and symbolism of this Nyingma tradition of Buddhist practice. It all comes from the cosmology and the iconography, the pantheon of what's called the Guhya Garbha Tantra of Nyingma Pa Buddhism. It probably wouldn't appear like that to us when we enter the Inbetween, but that's a whole other story. And it is interesting that it's images that emerge, and it's significant forms that emerge to communicate with us. It's as if reality is trying to get through, and we are part of reality. We're trying to get through, as it were, to ourselves, and it's Buddha forms that are trying to get through, are trying to communicate. I'm going to read to you a little bit from the appearance of the Buddha Amitabha, so you get a taste of what can happen, and partly because the language is so incredibly beautiful. O son of noble family, listen without distraction. On the fourth day, the purity of the element fire will arise in the form of red light. At that time, from the red western Buddha field of the blissful Sakavati, the transcendent Lord Amitabha will dawn before you, his body red in colour, holding in his right hand a lotus flower, seated on a peacock throne, and embraced by the supreme consort, Pandaravasini, she of white raiment. They are encircled by two male bodhisattvas, Avalokiteshvara and Manjushri, and two female bodhisattvas, Gita and Alokar. Thus 6 Buddha bodies will be shining before you from within a space of rainbow light. The red light of the discriminating wisdom, which is the natural purity of the skandha of perception, red and dazzling, adorned by large and small drops of light, radiant and clear, bright and dazzling, will emanate from the heart of Amitabha and his consort, and will shine piercingly before you at the level of your heart with such brilliance that your eyes cannot bear it. Do not be afraid. Together with the wisdom light, a dull yellow light of the realm of the hungry ghosts will also dawn before you and touch your heart. Do not delight in the dull yellow light. Do not become attached to it and do not cling to it. At this time, under the sway of deep desire, you will wish to turn away in terror from the bright red light, and you will come to delight in the dull yellow light of the hungry ghosts and feel attachment towards it. At this moment, abandon your fear and recognize the red light, bright and dazzling, radiant and clear, to be wisdom. Let your awareness relax and abide directly within it, resting in a state of non-activity. Have confidence in the radiant red luminosity. Be drawn to it with longing devotion. If you recognize this radiance as the natural luminosity of your own awareness, even though you may feel no devotion towards it and have not recited the aspirational prayer, all the Buddha bodies and light rays will dissolve inseparably into you, and you will attain Buddhahood. If you are not able to recognize the radiance in this way, then pray with devotion, thinking, this is the light ray of the transcendent Lord Amitabha's compassion. I go for refuge to it. This truly is the light ray hook of the transcendent Lord Amitabha's compassion. Be devoted to it. Do not turn away. Should you turn away, the luminosity will accompany you inseparably. Do not be afraid. Do not be attached to the dull yellow light of the hungry ghost. This is the inviting path created by your own habitual tendencies of deep-seated desire, which you yourself have generated. And then it goes on to say, well, if you follow that dull yellow light, you will be reborn in that realm of the hungry ghosts and experience the suffering of unsatisfied craving endlessly. So it's a very, very, very powerful vision that's being described. Very, very dramatic. And this is one of the great things about the bardo journey, the in-between state. These visions arise and you have these choices. The choice between going for refuge to the Buddha in whatever way the Buddha has, whatever form the Buddha is taking, whatever form reality is taking, or you can just take the path of least resistance, that dull light, which comes from your own habitual tendencies, whether it's craving or hatred or delusion or jealousy, or ignorance or whatever it might be, and you just follow that and you just move towards your habitual tendencies. And of course this is can be seen also as something that we need to train in all the time. Actually, this is one of the great learnings, I think, from the bardo to dole, that every moment actually, in a sense, is a bardo. This is what Sangharakshita calls in one of his famous lectures the gap. The gap between feeling and craving. The gap between feeling and desire or hatred, whatever it might be. This is where we need to really generate this strong awareness and take a different direction. And you notice it's not just resting in the pure awareness of the profound luminosity of Amitabha's wisdom. You notice it talks about going for refuge, making a real commitment to the spiritual path, deciding this is my life. I'm going to move in the direction of awareness and reality. I am not going to go down the easy path of my craving and my unskillful tendencies. So this is perhaps what we can learn from this particular thing. There's so much more to say just in that reading. We could spend weeks studying that whole reading to do with Amitabha. And again, this incredible vision that our being, our skandha of perception, actually has a divine dimension. It's the jnana of discriminating awareness. It is the Buddha Amitabha. Again, people can be very facile in talking about this, and it's an idea This has to be experienced through profoundly meditating on the real meaning of Amitabha, the real meaning of the discriminating wisdom. It's not an idea, it's a visionary experience. It's to do with the vision of Amitabha, it's to do with the image. But I'm going to stay with this notion of the image as well, because usually we can't stay with these visions. We don't end up being reborn in the heart of Amitabha and being reborn in the Pure Land. It's possible. They wouldn't give this text if we don't do that, and we tend to bounce down. I won't go into all the other visions. And we eventually arrive in this visionary journey in the in-between death, in the bardo of taking rebirth. And here there are things that I find in a way they're more sort of familiar, weirdly. Not that I've got a memory of the bardo, but for some reason I can relate to them more, the images here. It said that eventually you feel you're being blown by great winds across a kind of desert, and you try to hide in little hovels and behind these sort of thin bushes as this great wind blows you along. And it said, this is the wind of your karma. I find that a very expressive way of talking this sense. You have that feeling sometimes. You try to make all the effort you can to change, and you're just sort of overwhelmed by the sort of habits of your past, the habits of life. They're just sort of pushing you and pressing you, and you're trying to push it back, but they keep squeezing you. Your options seem to be narrowing. I don't know, as I've got older, it seems to be harder and harder for me to change my habits, even though I've been practicing the Dharma, trying to practice the Dharma for a long time. And the winds of karma sort of drive you on, and eventually you see many couples copulating. You see men and women having sex. This is what starts to emerge, and you start to really focus on one of these couples, and you feel intense desire, either for the man or the woman, and jealousy for the other one. And you want to get right in there. You want to sort of break them up and get in there and have sex, with one of those couples. It's really, really strong. It's sort of nightmarish, isn't it? Sort of like a bad, terrible nightmare, that you're being blown by this karma in this terrible desert, and then there's sex. Thank goodness, that'll fix it. I'll get in there and that'll fix it. Here, you can work. Even here, you can work. Here we have the bardo of taking rebirth. The verse here goes, "Oh, now, when the bardo of taking rebirth upon me is dawning, one pointedly holding fast to a single wish, I will continue the path of good deeds with repeated efforts. May the womb door be closed and the revulsion recollected. The hour has come when energy and pure love are needed. May I cast off jealousy and meditate upon the Guru, the Father, Mother." And the Lama tells you must keep reciting these verses at this time. You must change your perception of what is really happening here. First of all, you need to continue the path of good deeds with repeated efforts. The text says actually what you must do here, another translation, you must connect with the residual potency of your previous skillful actions. Don't concentrate on the negativity. This is really interesting. So often when we're in difficulty, I find this, and I know some of my friends do, we focus on, how unskillful we've been, how bad we are. So many conversations I have with different people, I have to keep reminding them of their potency, the potency of the skillful actions that they do, that they've done, that they continue to do. I wish I could say that to myself sometimes. Look, stop. Just stop worrying about the things you haven't done and the bad things you've done. Concentrate on the good that you've done, the many, many good things that you've done. That's powerful. That makes it grow. And in this, again, in these perilous times, when we're blown by the winds of karma, whether it's in the in-between or whether it's here and now, reflect on that. Concentrate on the good so that you've got a different way of seeing. And what you're being asked to do is to close the womb entrance, because what you're seeing, this couple that you're trying to get in between, that's your future parents. It's sort of, it's quite Freudian, the bardo that what brings you back is sexual desire. What brings you back for repeated rebirth is bhava trishna, karma bhava trishna. It's that thirst, that craving to be, and that's bound up with sex. It's bound up, it seems, with sexual desire, that you want to be, and they are going to be your parents. And if you do go between them, you swoon, and then you're in the womb. The possibility of liberation has been lost. So you've got to cast off that jealousy by remembering your positive deeds and develop energy and pure love. Energy and pure love is a translation really of energy and pure perception. But I like pure love because pure perception is a loving and appreciating and relishing what you're seeing. And the pure perception is not seeing this as an ordinary couple copulating. It's seeing your teacher in his archetypal form, like Padmavajra, in union with his darkening. You're seeing the image of wisdom and compassion. And the Lama tells you, bow down to that as an image of wisdom and compassion. Make offerings. Unite with wisdom and compassion. Open to wisdom and compassion. Now, whether you take this literally or not, and it's hard to take it literally in some ways, there's something very powerful here for me. How are you going to deal with desire? Desire, creates, strong desire creates images. You only have to look at the sort of sitting in meditation sometimes, and you go off on a lurid sexual fantasy. You've made images in your mind out of desire. It's this thing of people saying they can't imagine. Well, we're imagining all the time. And you can create this sort of, this sort of fantasy in your mind, or maybe it might be you're fantasizing about what you're going to eat for dinner, or what you're going to buy on Amazon, or the next film you're going to see. But you've got this picture. We naturally need more compelling images. This is why we fill this room with images. We need the compelling images that speak to our hearts, that draw out real faith, real devotion, which is stronger than that desire that sends us round the wheel of life. That's what this is really getting at. And again, I think this applies to our life generally. What are the compelling images of the Dharma in our lives? What's really awakening in us, that real movement in the direction of enlightenment and in the direction of real spiritual transformation. I'm sure this afternoon Aloka is going to be talking about this. We've got to change and break the repetitive cycle. And we need powerful images and myths and symbols that we really respond to from deep within ourselves to do that. So I need to draw this talk to a conclusion. At the beginning of my talk, I mentioned my time in India. Things did get a bit better in India. In a sense, there was a kind of intervention from a spiritual friend, from a teacher. Bhante eventually came to India after Lokamitra and I had been there for a few months. He returned to give wonderful lectures and to perform the first ordinations in India, and it was a wonderful time. It was one of the happiest times, I would say, of my life, just being able to serve my teacher. I was Bhante's attendant for for a couple of weeks, making his tea, washing his robes, putting up his mosquito net, gathering up the garlands after these incredible lectures to thousands of people, and generally typing his letters and just generally being around. And I think that's the preferred life for me in many ways. And of course, I learnt so much from him in his teaching. And one talk in particular, which I've mentioned many times, but I make no apology for mentioning it again, and it was the Punyana Modana speech, the transference of merit, the rejoicing in merit speech for the Mitra, Mr. Wogmare, who'd suddenly died. So one of Bhante's lectures was in the area where our friend Mr. Wogmare had died. And Punyana Modanas are these wonderful events which happen after someone has died, some weeks or months after someone has died, where you rejoice in their merits, you transfer their merits. The family usually gives a sort of food offerings to the Sangha, and all the merit is dedicated for the good of that person who's died. And always there is a Dharma talk, and Bhante gave the speech. And his speech was on a verse which I must have read, but had not heeded, from the Dhammapada, from, I think it's verse 6 in the Dhammapada, so very early on in the Dhammapada. And the verse is hard to translate, but Bhante's translation goes, "Others do not realise that we're all heading for death. Those who do realise it will compose their quarrels. Others do not realise that we are all heading for death. Those who do realise it will compose their quarrels." And I remember at the time it struck me the Buddha must have been enlightened. Just to hear that, the connection being made between realising that you're going to die and composing, ending all your quarrels, which of course means developing loving kindness all the time so that you never fall out. I thought, well, to put those together so elegantly in such a pithy way, that man must have been enlightened. And of course, Bhante's exposition was so down to earth and so inspiring and so moving. He quoted the Bible, I remember, one from the Old Testament. "Do not let the sun set on your quarrels. Do not let the sun set on your quarrels." Because if you're in conflict with someone and they die or you die, you can't resolve it with them. Certainly not in this life. That opportunity has gone. So we need to really value this life because it could end at any time. It could end at any moment, and we value it especially with the development of loving kindness and coming into deeper and deeper levels of harmony with others. That's probably the best possible preparation for death. The others, by the way, are those who've not realised the verse that comes prior to this verse in the Dhammapada. "Here in this world, hatred never ceases through hatred. It only ceases through love. This is the eternal law. This is the Sanatana Dhamma. This is the eternal truth. Here in this world, hatred never ceases through hatred. It only ceases through love. This is the eternal law." So in the end, after all the discussion of the Bardo Tadol, we come back to something really basic. We come back to realising the truth of impermanence. We come back to the development of loving kindness. We come back to the words of great teachers who can guide us. The Buddha, my own teacher, Bhante. We are in very, very difficult times with the pandemic, with the lockdown, and with, let's face it, quite a lot of anxiety and therefore quite a lot of hatred that can be in the world. We have an opportunity to make a path, to find a path through this, through waking up to impermanence fully, to enter into the reality undistractedly, and accompany with that with unchanging loving kindness. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Padmavajra. Chris, if you could just angle the camera a little bit so my head's not chopped off. There we go. Hello. Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much, Padmavajra. I won't say too much just so that we can get into our groups, but yeah, just want to really say thank you on behalf of all these hundreds of people for the talk that you've just given us. Particularly appreciate the personal beginning and end, but then it's like you've just taken us on this journey. It's like you've been the guide on our level in theory through the text of the Bardo Tudol in such a fantastic way. At times it was bracing and sobering the way you were making us confront the real existential issues, you know, the fact of death in particular, and asking that question, asking us to be honest. How do we respond to those moments of groundlessness? What are our actual habitual responses? But it was such a highly positive vision as well that you showed us in the sense of the positive aspects of spiritual friendship, having the guide, the potential of our consciousness, that ever-present potential of our consciousness, and the power of our skillful deeds as well. So a really positive vision there. And an exhortation, so an exhortation to train, to prepare, to gather the provisions that we need, and especially an emphasis there on loving kindness as the real true preparation for life and for death. And then finishing as well with wonderful images of Amitabha, all the visions there within the Bardo state itself. Some of them attractive and appealing for different reasons, I suppose, others less so. And an exhortation again to make sure that we are not imaging our lesser desires, but really imaging our strongest positive aspirations for spiritual growth, and setting us up nicely, I think, to welcome Aloka this afternoon to go into that area in a bit more depth. But I'm sure there's lots there in the talk for you to discuss in the groups. I'm sure you've got all kinds of questions that you want to put to Padmavajra directly, so do remember to give those questions to your group leader at the end of the session. But otherwise I hope you have a good discussion in your groups. Remember to stay logged in now, don't go anywhere. Obviously you can go and boil the kettle, but leave your computer on, leave your session logged in. That's what I suggest we do. It's nearly 12 o'clock, so if you do need a break, a loo break or a drink, just go and get something, but come straight back to your computer, and then you'll meet your group and go through until 1 o'clock and for lunch. But we'll see you back here in the shrine room for the session at 2:30 with Aloka. So I'll just finish again by asking for another round of applause for Padmavajra.